Alright, I'll just give you a quick run through this. Here we go. Algebra 1, 8-5 difference of squares. Alright, remember when we multiplied this, it came out to this. You can use the FOIL method or the box method. The middle two terms or the diagonal terms cancel out. And then I have x squared minus 36. Now we can go directly from this right here back to here. The difference of squares is what that's called. We have a square here, x squared minus 36. Okay, so the general rule here is a squared minus b squared is the square root of the first term, first plus, and then minus the square root of the second term. Alright, so here's an example. If we want to factor this, we check first, do they have anything in common? 16 and 9 don't have any common factors, so second we check their two terms, is it a difference of squares? Well, 16 is a square number, 9 is a square number, h squared and a squared are each squares. So we find the square roots, that's 4h and that's 3a. So plus 3a and then 4h minus 3a. And that is factored. Same thing here. Let me check. Are these squares? Yes, they are both square numbers. So I take the first one, square root it, second one, square root it, and plus here and minus there. All right. Now, check this. Remember, our first step is always check for common factors, because neither of these are squares. But what if I factor out a 3g? Well, then I'm left with 9g squared minus 1. 9g squared is a square. And 1 is also a square. 1 squared is 1. Okay, so I can factor this out. This is a difference of squares. 3g plus 1, 3g minus 1. And then I check, am I done? Is there anything else I can do? And we are done with this one. Okay. Here, first step, can I factor anything out? No. Next step, there are two terms. Two terms I check for squares. So difference of squares, yes. Okay, b squared, the square root of that, b to the fourth, the square root is b squared. And 16, the square root is 4. So plus 4 minus 4. Now, the sum of squares is prime. So this right here is prime. I can't factor that anymore. But the difference of squares I can factor, and each of these are still square numbers. So I'm going to carry this down and then factor out b squared minus 4. That gives me b plus 2 times b minus 2. Okay, same deal here. I can't factor anything out. Step 2, check, is it a difference of squares? And yes, it is. 25 plus x squared. Both of those terms are squares. I can't do anything with the sum of squares, so I'm going to carry that down. Difference of squares I can factor out. So that is 5 for the square root here and x for the square root there. Check again. Is there anything else we can factor? No, we are good. All right, here. Step 1, is there anything I can factor out? Yes, they have a common factor, and that's 5x. What am I left with? X to the fourth minus 9. Both of those are squares, so I can factor that further. That is x squared minus 3 and x squared plus 3. Can I factor that any further? No. 3 is not a square number. All right. Here we go, final example. Step 1, check, do they all have something in common? Yes, they do. They don't all have an x, but they all have a 7. So I can factor out a 7, and then I'm left with x to the third. Here I'm left with 3x squared. There, negative x, and then negative 3. Now, I have 4 terms. When I have 4 terms, I group. Okay, so we're going to factor by grouping. I'm going to look at this first part right here. I can factor out an x squared. Leaves me with x plus 3. Now remember, when we're factoring by grouping, we want both sets of parentheses to say the same thing if possible. So what can I factor out here to get x plus 3? I'm going to factor out a negative 1. That way I get x plus 3 in the parentheses. Now each the x squared and the negative 1 have an x plus 3. And I'm going to factor that out, and that leaves me with x squared minus 1. Okay, am I done? Well, let's check back. Nothing I can do here, nothing I can do with a sum here. X squared minus 1. Well, x squared is a square, this is a difference, and 1 is a square, so I can still do something here. So I'm going to carry down the first two, and then this right here will be factored as the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 1 is 1. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Our checklist for factoring. Go through it. Number 1, do all terms have something in common? Check for a common factor. If so, factor it out. Step 2, is it 2 terms? Check for the difference of squares. 3 terms? Use the box method. 4 terms? Factor by grouping. Remember, we want the parentheses to say the same thing if possible. And then finally, look back over and check. Is that your final answer? If not, we keep factoring until we cannot factor anymore. And that is all for today.